Every shift I work in emergency medicine, I see something that used to genuinely confuse me. A patient arrives with a serious cardiac event, a heart attack, atrial fibrillation, heart failure, and when you sit down and go through their history, they have been doing everything right. No smoking, reasonable diet, they exercise regularly, sometimes very regularly. And yet here they are, sitting in front of me in the emergency department. That pattern troubled me for years, until I started looking more carefully at the research. Until I started following the physiology of what actually happens to the heart under different types of training stress over long periods of time. And what I found was something that almost nobody in mainstream health communication is talking about clearly enough. There's a specific pattern of exercise, one that millions of health-conscious people are doing right now, proud of it, building their identity around it, that can, over years and decades, quietly stress the heart in ways that most standard tests will not pick up until the damage is already done. My name is Dr. Miles, 13 years in emergency medicine. And before you switch this off, I am not telling you exercise is bad. Physical inactivity is genuinely one of the most dangerous things you can do for your long-term cardiovascular health. Full stop. That is not in question. What I want to give you today is something more valuable than that. An upgrade, the same time investment, a meaningfully better cardiac outcome, and the research to back every word of it. If this is the kind of honest, evidence-based content you want more of, please subscribe to this channel right now. No agenda, nothing to sell, just the science explained properly. It means everything when you join. Now, let us get into it. The exercise pattern the research is increasingly concerned about, what I am describing, is chronic, prolonged, moderate intensity cardio. The long daily run at a steady pace. The hour on the bike at the same effort every session. The treadmill 5 or 6 times a week with no meaningful variation in intensity and insufficient recovery between sessions. The kind of training that looks impressive on paper and feels virtuous in practice. I want to be completely clear about something before this goes any further. If you put a sedentary person who does no exercise whatsoever next to someone doing regular steady-state cardio, the cardio person wins every single time. Regular moderate cardio dramatically outperforms inactivity across virtually every health metric. Blood pressure, weight, mood, cardiovascular risk. That is not the argument here. The argument is about optimization. Because if you take that same person doing regular cardio and you compare them to someone doing the same number of sessions per week, but structured very differently, some genuinely low-intensity zone 2 work, some high-intensity intervals, some resistance training, adequate recovery, the evidence suggests the second person ends up in a significantly better place from a cardiac perspective over the long term. Same time commitment, different structure, better outcome. That is the conversation that is not happening loudly enough, and it deserves to be. What the research actually shows. The evidence around cardiac remodeling in endurance athletes has been building in serious peer-reviewed journals for 15 to 20 years. Studies published in the European Heart Journal and the Journal of the American College of Cardiology have consistently shown structural changes in the right ventricle of long-term endurance athletes, changes that are not seen in resistance athletes or moderately active people following a varied training approach. The link between prolonged, strenuous exercise history and elevated atrial fibrillation risk has been replicated across multiple independent cohorts. This is not one small rogue study producing an unusual finding. It is a pattern appearing consistently across different research groups, different populations, and different methodologies. I want to be honest about the limitations here, because intellectual honesty matters, and because you deserve a straight answer. Most of the research to date has been conducted in people at the extreme end, ultra-endurance athletes, Ironman triathletes, ultramarathon runners, logging enormous volumes for decades. Whether the same effects manifest at lower training volumes is still being actively investigated. The honest answer is that we do not have perfect data yet at every level of training. But the mechanistic understanding what volume overload does to the right ventricle, what chronic, unrecovered oxidative stress does to heart muscle cells, is extremely well-established physiology. The dots connect. And that connection is what makes this conversation important even before the long-term population data is fully complete. The heart is a muscle, and it can be stressed the wrong way. The process at the center of this is called cardiac remodeling. Your heart is a muscle. Like every muscle in your body, it adapts to the demands you place on it. Give it the right kind of stress with adequate recovery, and it grows stronger. That is healthy remodeling. That is what we want. But subject it to chronic, poorly varied, unrecovered stress, and it adapts in ways that are not beneficial. The walls thicken and stiffen. The chambers stretch and dilate. The electrical systems that coordinate the heartbeat can begin to become unreliable. And critically, none of this happens quickly. It accumulates over years and decades, mostly below the threshold of what standard clinical tests will detect, until it eventually surfaces as a symptom, an abnormal ECG reading, or an emergency department visit. The part that receives the least attention is what happens specifically to the right side of the heart. During sustained aerobic exercise, the right ventricle, which pumps blood to the lungs, handles a volume surge of 4 to 5 times its resting output. And the right ventricle wall is considerably thinner and more structurally vulnerable to repeated stretch than the more robust left ventricle. When that volume surge is happening day after day, year after year, at the same moderate intensity without sufficient recovery, the structural consequences become measurable. That is exactly what the European Heart Journal data shows in long-term endurance athletes. And those structural changes feed directly into the elevated rates of atrial fibrillation observed in this population, one of the most counterintuitive findings in modern cardiology, but one that makes complete biological sense when you follow the mechanism carefully. Oxidative stress, the second pathway. Alongside cardiac remodeling, there is a second biological mechanism running in parallel that is equally important to understand. Prolonged, moderate-intensity cardio generates reactive oxygen species, essentially cellular exhaust products produced by the energy systems working hard for extended periods. Done in well-spaced bursts with adequate recovery time, this oxidative stress is beneficial. It stimulates your antioxidant systems, it strengthens mitochondrial function in the heart muscle. It is part of how exercise makes you healthier, but done chronically, without sufficient rest between sessions, it overwhelms those same defenses. The mitochondria inside your heart muscle cells begin to accumulate damage. Efficiency drops gradually. The heart becomes progressively less resilient over time. And here's the element that makes this particularly relevant for anyone over 50. Recovery capacity declines significantly with age. The same training load that your body absorbs and adapts to effectively at 35 is doing more net damage at 55 or 60. Same sessions, same distances, same effort, different biological response. The balance between productive stress and excessive damage shifts with age, and the training approach that worked for a decade may need to be restructured to remain genuinely beneficial rather than quietly harmful. What the evidence actually points toward. The training model that the research consistently supports is called polarized training. Roughly 80% of sessions at a genuinely low intensity, comfortable, conversational, no meaningful strain, what exercise physiologists call zone 2, and roughly 20% at genuinely high intensity short bursts of real effort with proper recovery between them. This combination does two things simultaneously that chronic moderate cardio cannot. It protects against the right ventricular volume overload that comes from sustained mid-level effort. And it delivers superior vascular benefits. High-intensity intervals are actually more effective at stimulating nitric oxide production in the coronary arteries, which is what keeps those vessels flexible and resistant to disease, than the equivalent time spent at a steady, moderate pace. Superior vascular protection, less total cardiac stress, potentially in less total time. For anyone over 50 specifically, hard cardiovascular sessions need around 48 hours of recovery between them. 3 to 4 structured sessions per week, combining genuine zone 2 aerobic work, 1 or 2 high-intensity intervals, and resistance training will produce better cardiac outcomes than daily moderate cardio. Not a more impressive-looking training log, better actual cardiac outcomes. That distinction matters. The resistance training piece. Resistance training belongs in this conversation, and it is consistently underrepresented in the way most cardio-focused people structure their exercise. Not just for muscle mass and metabolic health, though those benefits are significant and well documented, but specifically for the heart. Resistance training improves cardiac pumping efficiency without creating the volume overload problem that sustained aerobic exercise generates. It drives mitochondrial health. It reduces chronic systemic inflammation. It improves insulin sensitivity in ways that protect the cardiovascular system through a completely separate pathway from aerobic fitness. Research published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine found that combining resistance training and aerobic training produces better cardiovascular outcomes than aerobic training alone, particularly in people over 50. Not marginally better, meaningfully better. And yet the standard image of the health-conscious person who cares about their heart is someone running, cycling, or swimming. Rarely someone in a gym performing squats and rows. If your entire exercise program is cardiovascular and you are not incorporating any form of resistance work, that is a significant gap, not a minor refinement. A gap with measurable consequences for your long-term cardiac health. The practical framework. Here is what this looks like in practice. Because the research points in a specific direction, and you deserve specific guidance rather than vague encouragement to exercise differently. 2 to 3 genuine Zone 2 sessions per week. These should feel genuinely easy conversational pace. No strain, sustainable for extended periods. The temptation to push harder during these sessions is exactly what defeats the purpose. Easy means easy. 1 to 2 high-intensity sessions per week. Short intervals at genuine maximum or near maximum effort, followed by full recovery between efforts. These sessions are brief but demanding. The intensity is real. The recovery between efforts is complete. 2 resistance training sessions per week. Compound movements, squats, hinges, pushes, pulls that load the major muscle groups and drive the metabolic and structural adaptations that aerobic training alone cannot produce. And recovery is treated as a physiological requirement rather than optional, particularly over 50. The adaptation happens during rest, not during the session itself. Removing recovery is not training harder. It is training less effectively while accumulating more damage. The message here is not to stop exercising. It is to recognize that how you exercise matters as much as whether you exercise. A daily, moderate run has real value, but at the same time, structured differently, has considerably more value, particularly for the long-term health of the organ that, when it fails with consequences that no amount of previous fitness can immediately reverse. 13 years in emergency medicine has shown me what the end of this story looks like when the training stress accumulates without correction. But it has also shown me what the alternative looks like. People in their 70s and 80s with cardiovascular systems that have been genuinely well-maintained, not just well-exercised. The difference between those two outcomes is not the quantity of exercise in a lifetime. It is the quality of how it was structured. The heart needs the right kind of stress in the right doses with proper recovery. Get that balance right, and you are not just protecting yourself now. You are protecting the decades where cardiovascular health determines everything about how you live. If this video gave you something genuinely worth acting on, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Share it with someone whose entire exercise identity is built around daily, steady cardio. This conversation could be the most valuable one they have this year. I will see you in the next one.